16. It should have been a day of celebration, a milestone marking the transition to adulthood. Instead, it was the day my world shattered. Rain lashed against the windows of our suburban house, its relentless rhythm mirroring the storm brewing inside me. My sister Elena leaned casually against the wall, her lips curled into a smirk that made my stomach churn. Mom and Dad stood stiffly in front of me, their faces etched with a coldness I'd learned to recognize. "Ariel," Mom began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "we've decided it's time for you to leave." She said it as though she were announcing a minor inconvenience, not exiling her own daughter. "You're not like Elena. You're not college material, and we can't keep wasting resources on a lost cause." Dad, as always, remained hidden behind his newspaper, as detached and emotionally unavailable as ever. Elena, sensing my distress, stepped forward, the sharp click of her designer heels punctuating the silence. "Don't take it too hard, little sis," she said, her faux sympathy unmistakable. "Maybe you'll find work as a waitress. That seems more your speed." I stood frozen, my backpack clutched tightly in my hands, trying to comprehend their cruelty. The signs had been there all along: forgotten birthdays, constant comparisons, praise heaped on Elena while my efforts went unnoticed. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. Elena had always been their golden child, their prodigy. While she enjoyed private tutoring and elite dance classes, I scraped by, funding my own school supplies with part-time jobs. Even when I earned a B+ average despite the odds, the only response was a dismissive, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" "You have until tonight to pack," Mom added coldly. "And don't take anything we bought. Those are family assets." I laughed bitterly. "That won't be an issue. I've bought everything I own since I was 12. Elena rolled her eyes. "Always the victim, Ariel. This is why you'll never amount to anything." That night, packing my meager belongings into a battered duffel bag, I vowed to prove them wrong. Not just wrong, I would succeed so spectacularly that their betrayal would haunt them forever. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the past year secretly learning to code. Every dollar I earned working at the cafe went towards online courses. My high school computer science teacher, Mr. Davis, had seen my potential and quietly mentored me. While Elena flaunted her Stanford acceptance, I was building a future they couldn't even imagine. Instead of wandering the streets as my family probably hoped, I showed up on Mr. Davis's doorstep, duffel bag in hand and tears threatening to spill. He looked surprised but not shocked, as if some part of him had expected this. "Ariel," he exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug that felt like the first genuine act of kindness I'd received in years. "Come in, you're safe here." The Davises welcomed me like family. Their modest home became my sanctuary, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment I'd left behind. Mrs. Davis, a kind woman with a gentle smile, nurtured my talent, providing me with books, encouragement, and endless cups of tea. Mr. Davis continued to mentor me, pushing me to learn new programming languages, to think outside the box, to believe in my own abilities. Life with the Davises was simple but fulfilling. I helped with chores, shared meals with them, and spent hours in their spare room, which they'd converted into a makeshift office for me. I poured every ounce of myself into learning, coding, and growing. The anger and hurt I felt towards my family slowly began to transform into a quiet determination. I wouldn't let their rejection define me. I would forge my own path, fueled by their disdain. By 18, I had launched my first successful app, an educational platform for underprivileged students, inspired by my own struggles. Its impact caught the attention of Tech Fusion CEO, Michael Davis, no relation to my beloved Mr. Davis, who offered me a junior developer role on his team. It was a dream come true. I threw myself into the work, eager to learn from the best in the industry. I thrived in the fast-paced environment, my skills growing exponentially. By 26, I had become one of Tech Fusion's youngest executive vice presidents, managing billion-dollar projects. My achievements were public, but my name, legally changed to Ariel Davis, ensured my family remained blissfully unaware of my success. Meanwhile, Elena followed the predictable path: law school, a prestigious firm, a marriage to a lawyer from old money. Mom and Dad filled their social media with pictures of her picture-perfect life, their captions dripping with pride. They were living in a world of their own making, a world where I didn't exist. And then, fate intervened. One routine day at work, my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Davis," she said, her voice a little breathless. "The representatives for the merger meeting are here. They're from Thompson, Williams and Associates." My heart skipped a beat. Elena's firm. "Send them in," I said, adjusting my designer suit and settling into my office chair. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the encounter. The door opened, and there she was. Elena, poised and polished as ever, followed by her husband Julian and their colleagues. The moment her eyes met mine, her expression faltered. Her Hermes bag slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a thud that echoed in the sudden silence. "Ariel?" she whispered, stunned. "Elena," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. "Welcome to Tech Fusion. Shall we discuss the merger?" Her composure crumbled as realization dawned. The little sister she had dismissed, the lost cause, was now sitting in a corner office overlooking the city, commanding a power she never dreamed I could hold. This can't be real," she stammered, her carefully constructed facade cracking. You're not supposed to be here." I leaned back, the weight of my triumph speaking louder than words. "Well, Elena, I am here, so shall we begin?" Julian cleared his throat, attempting to regain a semblance of professionalism. "Ms. Davis," he said, "we weren't aware of your connection to Elena." I let the moment linger, savoring the sweet taste of vindication. "No," I replied, my voice calm but sharp. "I'm sure you weren't. Just like you probably didn't realize your firm's future rests entirely on my recommendation regarding this merger." Elena's face, already pale, turned ghostly white. The weight of my words settled on her like an avalanche. 10 years ago, she had laughed as our parents cast me out. Now, the life she had built on superiority and control was dangling by a thread, and I held the scissors. The meeting that followed was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Watching Elena squirm under the weight of her crumbling facade felt like justice. Every time she spoke, I heard echoes of the past, the condescending tone, the dismissive flick of her wrist, the subtle insults veiled as concern. But this time, her words held no power over me. I was in control. This, however, was just the beginning. Elena had no idea what was coming next, and neither did our parents. Revenge, like success, is best served with careful planning and perfect timing. As Elena and her team left my office, I saw the cracks forming in her once impenetrable confidence. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her power, her superiority, was unraveling in real time. This was just part one of a decade-long plan. The real blow was yet to come. News of the meeting spread quickly through Elena's circles. Within days, whispers of my identity replaced the reverent mentions of her accomplishments. Ariel Davis, the tech genius, the prodigy on magazine covers, the self-made millionaire, was no longer just a name in the tech world to Elena. I was the sister she had dismissed and discarded, the ghost she thought she'd buried rising to haunt her. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and messages from her. 17 missed calls in a single day. Each one was a small victory, a stark reminder of the countless times my family had ignored me. "Ms. Davis," my assistant Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Your sister is in the lobby again. She's insisting on seeing you." I glanced at my Rolex, a symbol of how far I'd come from that 16-year-old girl in thrifted clothes. "Let her wait," I replied smoothly. "I have more pressing matters to attend to." Those pressing matters included signing the final paperwork for Tech Fusion's acquisition of Thompson, Williams and Associates. But not through the merger they desperately sought. This was a hostile takeover, a decisive end to their firm as they knew it. An hour later, Elena burst into my office. Her once flawless appearance was in shambles. her suit wrinkled, her mascara streaked from tears. "Ariel, please," she began, her voice trembling. "You have to talk to me. The merger. Our firm depends on it." I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment stretch. "Interesting. Now you need something from me. Quite the change from 10 years ago, isn't it?" "I was young," she protested weakly, desperation etched into her features. "We all were. I didn't understand." "Didn't understand what?" I interrupted, my tone icy. "That treating your own sister like garbage might come back to haunt you. That the person you threw away might actually amount to something?" She sank into the chair opposite me, the weight of her guilt pulling her down. "What do you want, Ariel? An apology? Money? Just tell me." I laughed, a sound as bitter as it was triumphant. "Money, Elena. I make more in a month than you do in a year. And as for an apology?" I rose from my chair and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "It's far too late for that." "Mom and Dad want to see you," Elena whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're devastated. They didn't know about your success." "Devastated they missed out on the money, you mean?" I replied, not bothering to mask my disdain. "Tell me, did they ever look for me after throwing me out? Did any of you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Mr. Davis looked for me," I continued, my voice steady with resolve. "He and his wife gave me a home, believed in me, and supported my dreams. They're my real family." Elena's eyes widened in realization. You changed your name to Davis?" "I did," I said simply. The moment I turned 18, I wanted nothing to do with a name that brought me nothing but pain. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael Davis, Tech Fusion CEO. "Acquisition approved by the board. Proceed as planned." I turned back to Elena, my expression unreadable. "You'll be getting some interesting news about your firm soon. I suggest you update your resume." Her panic was palpable. "What do you mean?" I savored the moment before delivering the blow. "Tech Fusion isn't merging with Thompson Williams and Associates," I said, each word deliberate. "We're buying it, and our first order of business is restructuring the management team." The blood drained from her face as the implications sank in. "You can't do this. Julian's family, their connections." I laughed outright this time. "Julian's country club connections, Elena. I have dinner with senators and tech billionaires. His world is nothing compared to mine." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. Julian's name lit up the screen. The news was spreading like wildfire. "This isn't just about me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Think about the employees, their families." "Don't lecture me about caring for others," I said sharply. "Unlike our parents, I don't punish innocent people for someone else's mistakes. The employees will be taken care of, but the senior partners who perpetuated that toxic culture, they're out." She stood shakily, her entire world collapsing around her. "Mom and Dad will be at my house tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want to make things right." I paused, considering her words. Seeing them grovel might be amusing, but I had a better idea. "Tell them to come to the Capitol tomorrow night at 8. I'll reserve a private room." After she left, I called Mr. Davis. "They took the bait," I said, satisfaction evident in my tone. "Are you sure about this, Ariel?" he asked gently. "Revenge can feel hollow in the end." "This isn't just revenge," I assured him. "This is justice. And tomorrow, they'll finally understand what that means." The next evening, I sat in the Capitol's most exclusive dining room, the epitome of luxury, waiting for my family to arrive. Their expressions were a mix of awe and discomfort. The daughter they discarded now commanded a world they could only dream of entering. "Ariel," Mom began, stepping forward as if to hug me. I didn't move. "Please," I said coldly, gesturing to the table. "Sit." Dad cleared his throat, clearly out of his depth. "We've been doing a lot of thinking, Princess." "Don't," I interrupted. "You lost the right to call me that the day you threw me out." Mom's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed as always. "We made a mistake," she sobbed. We were so wrong about you." The waiter approached, presenting a bottle of wine worth more than their monthly mortgage payment. I gestured for it to be poured, the sound of the cork popping slicing through the tense air. "Yes, you were wrong," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "But that's not why I agreed to this dinner." Elena shifted in her seat, her confidence unraveling. "Ariel, about the firm." "The acquisition is final," I replied sharply. "And again, that's not why we're here." From my briefcase, I withdrew 3 folders and slid one to each of them. "Open them." The silence thickened as they complied. Inside each folder were meticulously documented records, a timeline of their cruelty, from forgotten birthdays to scathing remarks, juxtaposed with financial statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios, all of it theirs. "How did you get this?" Dad's voice faltered as his eyes darted over the damning contents. "While you were busy boasting about Elena's mediocre achievements," I began, leaning back in my chair, "I was busy acquiring every debt you owed. Your mortgage, car loans, Elena's student loans, even Dad's failing business liabilities. I own it all. Every penny you owe is now mine." The shock was palpable. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched the folder, her perfectly manicured nails denting the expensive paper. "Now," I said, taking a measured sip of the wine, "we're going to discuss terms." The private dining room fell into an uneasy silence. For once, they were at a loss for words. Dad, the man who once dismissed me with a sneer, finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "What do you want?" "What I want," I said, leaning forward, "is for you to understand what you threw away 10 years ago. Not just a daughter, but someone who could have been your greatest ally." Mom dabbed at her tears, her designer mascara smudging in streaks. "We can be a family again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Ariel, we'll do anything. Anything." I raised an eyebrow, pulling out another set of papers. "Then sign this." Elena, ever the lawyer, grabbed the document first. Her face paled as she read it. This is everything. The house, Dad's business, my trust fund." "Precisely," I said coolly. "Sign it all over to me, and I'll erase your debts. Refuse, and tomorrow I'll foreclose on everything." "You can't do this," Dad protested, his voice tinged with desperation. "We'll be ruined." "Ruined?" I echoed, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "Let me tell you about ruined. Ruined is being 16 and sleeping in a park because your family threw you out. Ruined is working 3 jobs just to afford a meal. Ruined is watching the sister who mocked you post about her perfect life while you fight to survive." Elena's anger flared. "You're better than this, Ariel. You've already won. You're wealthy, powerful. Why stoop to our level?" "This isn't about stooping," I said, my voice steady. "This is about justice, consequences." From my phone, I played a recording. Their voices from a decade ago filled the room, cutting through their veneer of remorse. Sneers, dismissive laughter, cruel words predicting my failure. Mom covered her mouth as if to block out the sound of her own venom. "I kept this," I said quietly, pausing the recording. Every time I felt like giving up, it reminded me what I was working for. Not just success, this moment. Dad's hands trembled as he picked up the pen and signed the papers. Mom followed, her tears falling freely. Elena hesitated, her pride warring with her fear, but eventually she signed as well. "It's done," I said, collecting the documents. "The apartment keys are with the maitre d'. You have until tomorrow to move your essentials. Everything else will be sold." As they stood to leave, I delivered my final blow. 10 years ago, you told me I'd never amount to anything. You were wrong. I became everything you said I couldn't, not because of you, but in spite of you." Elena paused at the door, her voice fragile. "Will we ever see you again?" I considered her question. "That depends on whether you learn from this." After they left, Mr. Davis entered the room, his warm smile a balm to my hardened exterior. He hugged me tightly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" For the first time in 10 years, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "I think I am," I said, my voice lighter. The next morning, I watched movers dismantle my old family home, piece by piece. Elena's perfect life unraveled. Dad's business was already undergoing restructuring, and Mom's social circle buzzed with the scandal of their fall from grace. But revenge wasn't my ultimate goal. I had something bigger in mind. The following week, I announced the creation of the Davis Foundation for Youth Empowerment, its mission to support abandoned and struggling teens, giving them the tools to rewrite their own stories. When I unveiled the foundation headquarters to Mr. and Mrs. Davis, they both cried. "This," Mrs. Davis said, her voice thick with pride, "is your real victory, turning pain into purpose." She was right. The legacy I was building wasn't born from vengeance, but from hope. Each teenager who walked through the foundation's doors would find the support I once needed and received from the Davises. Months later, a letter arrived from Elena. She wrote about her new life, working as a paralegal, living in a modest apartment, and finally understanding the value of humility. I didn't respond. Instead, I anonymously donated to the legal aid clinic where she worked, ensuring they could continue helping others. Success, I realized, wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself that resilience could triumph over cruelty. My biological family may have abandoned me, but their rejection had forged me into someone unstoppable, someone who not only survived, but thrived, and used that success to lift others. In the end, I had gained something far more valuable than revenge. I had found freedom, purpose, and an unshakable peace. The girl they threw away had become the woman they could never be. Happy, fulfilled, and whole. Story 2. That was clear as soon as I could comprehend things. I was the afterthought while Tommy, my elder brother, was the star of the show. "Make sure you get home by 3:30, Nicole, so you can assist your brother with his lunch." Almost every morning before school, Mom would say. I was 12. He was 15. And it seems that our family's prodigy was unable to make his own lunch. But after school, I'd like to join the art group, Mom. I previously played, even though I knew it was useless. "Your brother is practicing for football." With that last glance, she would say, like my voice didn't even register, "He must eat healthily. You are aware of how crucial it is to him." My hand-me-down flip phone seemed like an antique, while Tommy, meantime, would be splayed on the couch, typing away on his newest iPhone, a birthday present. "It's a smirk, Nikki, without even looking up. Act like a good sister." Dad was no exception. "This is fantastic preparation for becoming a wife, Nicole." As if caring for Tommy was the ultimate goal of my life, he informed me, "A woman must be able to care for her family on a daily basis. I come home quickly from school so we may go together." While I was buried, I attempted to fit in my studies and housework, ironed Tommy's clothing for the following day, and did anything he requested. Tommy would be off doing one of his many things, debate club for football and computer programming. His parents made sure he got every chance they could think of. Grandma Rose was the only one who appeared to actually notice me. Every time there was a car, her old Victorian mansion across town became my haven. I rode my bike over there, speeding through the streets lined with trees, until I saw her comfortable wraparound porch. My girl is there. Her silver hair would gleam in the sunlight as she called from her garden. There were no golden children or favorites in her home, nothing but unconditional love, sweets, and warmth. Her home was ancient and rather dilapidated, with peeling wallpaper and groaning flooring. However, every flaw felt like home, and what made it unique was the way our grandmother treated us. She made sure Tommy and I received the same attention, the same considerate presents, and the same tender embraces whether it was Christmas, a birthday, or simply another weekend. Tommy was going nuts about it. It all came to a head one day. Grandma purchased us both new tablets for Tommy's 16th birthday. Same, superior ones. Tommy burst after glancing at his. "Do you mean me?" His cheeks flushed with rage, he screamed. Nicole's armchair hands folded. "A satcom lead gives her the exact same thing as me on my birthday. I love you both equally, Tommy, my sweetheart. It's unfair." He was virtually yelling. My parents realize I deserve better things. Therefore, they provide them to me. And the one with the future, the athletic accomplishments, and the grades. Nicole simply is. Grandma didn't even bat an eyelid, but I was stunned. Somehow she loomed over him as she stood up. Thomas. Michael Parker, she remarked in a cool, razor-sharp voice. In my home or anywhere else, you will not talk about your sister in that manner. Grandma's china teacups shook when Tommy slammed the front door shut and stormed away. That seemed to be the end of it. However, Granny unexpectedly visited our home the next day, Allison facing my parents from the top of the stairs. She spoke in a forceful yet quiet voice. "It's unacceptable the way you're raising these kids," she remarked. "The partiality must end." The man attempted to argue. "We're acting in their best interests," Grandma said in a chilly tone. "What do you call that?" "Well, things must alter if you want me to provide for their upbringing financially." What I was hearing was so unbelievable. I heard my folks conversing later that evening. Mom muttered, "We can't afford to lose her money. Tommy's college fund need it." Dad groaned, "I know. We'll have to comply. Give Nicole a few items to keep her content." Everything changed in a week. After pleading for piano lessons since I was 10, I was eventually enrolled. My folks even inquired about my day when a brand new iPhone showed up on my bedside table. However, everything fell. How? Grandma was caring for her roses in her yard when I next saw her. Her smile was knowing as she gazed at me. "You know, dear," she added, holding clippers. "I receive thorough reports that show how every dollar of my assistance is used. These days, your parents seem to be making much wiser decisions. Do you not think?" Realizing that my parents' love had conditions was an odd, bittersweet experience. They inquire about my day, go to my school functions, and purchase items for me. However, I was aware that their hearts weren't in it. They were still glowing differently when Tommy entered the room. I eventually came to terms with it. At least I was no longer required to serve as Tommy's personal maid every day. Tommy felt like he had won the Nobel Prize when he graduated from high school and was accepted to a university 3 hours away. Everyone they knew was invited to the enormous celebration that Mom and Dad threw. Grandma Rose watched from the corner, her eyes full of knowledge. Family dinners over the first few months were replete with stories about Tommy's college experience, his instructors, and his promising future. Then one day, his face crimson with anger, Dad returned home with a letter that looked official. Tommy was in danger of being expelled and was on academic probation. He had been bragging about how much fun he had having throughout all those study sessions. The following day, Grandma Rose arrived, more irate than I had ever seen her. With a steely voice, she told my parents, "If you don't get that boy in mind, when he gets himself expelled, don't expect me to cover another college tuition." My parents were in a panic because they thought they could lose Grandma's assistance. That weekend, they took a car to the university. Tommy must have been rattled by what they said since he sounded different the next week when he called home. For once in his life, he was subdued. He had to deal with actual repercussions. Somehow, he was able to improve his grades sufficiently to continue his education, and he finally received his diploma. In the meantime, I got admitted to a local college's business management program. My parents hardly noticed that Grandma was paying my education, while I was a college student. Grandma's phone call was the only way to celebrate making the dean's list. After 4 years, graduation day arrived without warning. Grandma was there with a pleased smile. My parents attended as well, although they spoke about Tommy's new job for the whole of the ceremony. I didn't care by then. One of the biggest marketing organizations in town, Parker and Associates, offered me a position once I had my degree. It seemed like the world stopped when Grandma Rose died. I could have stopped gazing at her garden at her burial, wondering who would now look after her cherished flowers. We met at her lawyer's office a week later to hear her will read. Tommy arrived from out of state wearing a costly suit that gave him the appearance of a child playing dress-up, as though they still needed to serve as referees after all these years. Mom and Dad sat between us. The lawyer started by saying that Mrs. Rose Parker's 2 grandchildren, Nicole and Thomas Parker, would split her wealth. Their personal decision will determine the divide. The house will go to one, while the other will get $500,000. As the older grandchild, Thomas gets the first pick. Tommy did laugh. Is this a joke? He surveyed the space. Do you honestly believe that musty old mansion would appeal to me? I'll accept the cash. I have ambitious goals. I intend to launch my own company. Let me prove myself to everyone. The house, complete with creaking floorboards and strange odors, is Nicole's. My heart pounded. Grandma's home is my haven. For all these years, I'll accept it. Silently but forcefully, I said. The ensuing years were filled with perseverance and hard effort. At Parker Associates, I put myself into my work, setting sales records and eventually rising to the position of head of sales. Grandma's house was renovated with every pay raise, while updating it with new plumbing, electricity, and a cutting-edge kitchen that still felt like it belonged in a Victorian house. I managed to maintain its charm. I kept Grandma's garden alive by spending weekends learning everything I could about roses. Mom and Dad came to visit once the renovations were finished. They gaped at the crown molding, the glossy hardwood floors, and the gourmet kitchen as I strolled around the renovated rooms. This is amazing. As she ran her palm over the marble countertop, Mom whispered. Dad groaned after nodding. Tommy's failure to take the house is regrettable. For him and his new wife, this would have been ideal. A certain item remained constant. Speaking of which, Mom casually added with force, has your brother contacted you recently? I got it. We haven't received an invitation to his wedding. It was 6 months ago. In front of his wife's relatives and friends in her hometown, he had tied the knot. Mom had shown me pictures that she had discovered on Facebook. Shining in designer white, Tommy assaults his new bride, Rebecca. Then the doorbell rang one Sunday afternoon while I was trimming my grandmother's flowers. When I opened the door, I took my time whacking my hands because I wasn't expecting anyone. I almost let my gardening gloves fall. Tommy didn't resemble the prosperous businessman he presented himself as on social media as he stood there. Rebecca was standing next to him, looking around my house as though she were inspecting it. Tommy smiled at me oddly. Nikki, might we have a quiet conversation for a moment? We entered Grandma's former study. I work from home now. Tommy's face was desperate as he shut the door. He whispered, Sis, I need your help. The company is collapsing. We are on the verge of losing everything. We were forced to vacate our apartment. He combed his hair with his hand. Is it possible for us to remain here? Jacinta, the situation improves. Stunned, I gazed at him. Except for all those years of entitled demands, Tommy had never asked me for anything. However, I saw my brother, my parents' golden child, for the first time. All right, I said to myself, but only for a moment. The doorbell rang once more the following morning. This time it was Mom and Dad practically bursting with excitement. We came as soon as Tommy told us. Mom rushed past me to hug Rebecca. Oh, sweetheart, we're so happy to finally meet you in person for the next 2 hours. I might as well have been invisible. I served coffee at Mom's request and listened as Rebecca charmed my parents with tales of her family connections and Tommy's brain. Business ventures. Nicole, Mom called as I headed to the kitchen. Be a kind and prepare us some lunch, something wonderful. Rebecca is used to good eating that set the tone for the weeks that followed. I returned home from long days at work to find Tommy and Rebecca landing in my living room, waiting for dinner. One evening, as I enter through the door, Rebecca looks up from her phone. Aren't you going to start cooking? She asked, scarcely looking at me. We're famished. I had just worked a 12-hour day. I dropped my briefcase and answered, Why don't you cook something? Rebecca's head shot up, her eyes sharpening. I'm sorry. You should be glad we let you stay here at all. The least you could do is make excellent food. I looked at Tommy, perplexed. He pushed me into the study, closed the door behind us. Look, he said hastily in a whisper. Rebecca believes that I'm letting you remain here out of courtesy, and that this is my home. Nikki, she's from a wealthy family. She is accustomed to a particular way of life. She will leave me if she discovers that I am impoverished. I once looked at my brother, so arrogant that he is now pleading with me to tell his wife a falsehood. All right, at last, I said. You two need to start showing me respect in my own house, but I won't tell her. No more attitude, no more demands. Are you a dealer? Tommy replied. his cheeks flushed with relief. As promised, Tommy calls her home-cooked meals to halt. Rather, I would return home to my kitchen, strewn with takeout containers from fancy eateries. Rebecca would sit on the couch and eat sushi or pad thai while hardly seeing me. I made no inquiries. After a hard day at the office, I was just relieved to not be playing cook. For a while, the arrangement worked. Until my mother called, I kept out of their path, and they stayed out of mine. Nikki. Her tone was harsh at first. These restaurant bills require our attention. You pay the bills at the end of the month, Tommy remarked. Nearly $3,000 is involved. My coffee almost suffocated me. Please pardon me. You can't expect them to go hungry, though. Tommy informed us that you had committed to paying for them meals during a difficult time. I've been using my credit card for everything. The account information for the transfer will be texted to you. Shaking hands. After hanging up, I texted Tommy. Now come to me. In a matter of minutes, he appeared anxious in my study. Would you mind explaining why your mother believes I'm taking care of your luxuries? With a chilly tone, I inquired. Tommy fumbled for an explanation as a moment of remorse flashed across his face. You must realize that Rebecca has certain expectations, Nikki, if she was aware of the dire situation. Give up. I raised a hand to say that. I've had enough. This is over. He had a frantic expression. Give me more time, please. Nikki, please, I'll find a solution. I swear. I looked at him, the brother who had been given everything throughout his life. All right, another opportunity to solve your own food dilemma. I'm not spending any money. Uncomfortably, the following 2 months went by. My house would be in a state of chaos when I returned home. I cleaned up after them in the evenings. Living in a cocoon, Tommy and Rebecca went shopping, ate out, and had lunch with their parents as if nothing were wrong. Rebecca was waiting for me in the living room when I arrived home early one evening, anticipating a peaceful evening with a glass of wine. She motioned for me to sit down and said, "We need to talk." Despite raising an eyebrow, I sat down. We might as well listen to whatever this was. I've waited. Rebecca started examining her freshly painted fingernails. However, enough is enough. You will now pay us $2,000 a month for our rent. Given the neighborhood and the resume cooking and cleaning responsibilities, that is reasonable. I was unable to resist. I began to chuckle quietly and loudly. Rebecca's expression grew gloomy. Rebecca, what's so funny? This is a miscommunication. I live here. Take action. I felt bad for your spouse, so he's staying here. Her face was devoid of color. You're telling lies. Give him a call. I leaned back in my chair and said that. Who owns this house? Asked Tommy. She took out her phone, her hands shaking, and called Tommy. She lost her temper. Nicole is making up some absurd tale about how she came to buy this mansion. Inform her that she is mistaken. A lengthy pause ensued, and then, across the speaker, Tommy's voice crackled. She is being honest. It's her home. She was left to do it by Grandma. She offered me the money to launch a business, but I was unable to do so. We have no money. In her rush to get upstairs, Rebecca jumped up and knocked over a glass. As she packed furiously, I heard her hurling objects and slamming closet doors. She was dragging her high-end luggage down the stairs in a matter of minutes. She slammed the front door like a gunshot and left without turning around. Tommy barged into the kitchen early the following morning. Anger twisted his face. You are solely to blame for this. Rebecca refuses to speak to me and is divorcing me. It was not your place to tell her. Calm and determined, I took a seat with my coffee cup. No. Correct. Tommy, this is my home. The one you made fun of me for picking. The one you told your wife lies about in order to steal her parents. You're saying that I didn't have any rights? Haven't you always been envious of me? Just waiting for an opportunity to retaliate against me, he sneered. Leave, I said in a firm but quiet voice. Gather your belongings and leave. After giving me a fierce look, he stomped upstairs, strewing items in the visitor room. He didn't say goodbye when he eventually left. Before my phone rang, I was at peace for precisely 1 hour. The screen flashed Mom's name. How could you harm your brother in this way? Her voice was shrill as she demanded. He's inconsolable. He's back with us, sobbing uncontrollably. I have no problem with that. It's your problem, of course. Dad's voice interrupted. You need to give Tommy the house. It's the only way to rescue his marriage. Rebecca could come back if they have a suitable home. I laughed. Are you serious? You want me to give away my house because Tommy lied to his wife and lost his business? Happy? Your sibling? Mom nearly shrieked. Family helps. Family. I felt years of bitterness boiling up. Where was that family feeling while I was cooking and cleaning for Tommy? When you neglected my successes to laud him, Grandma's the only one who ever treated me like family, and she bequeathed this house to me. Conversation finished. I learned 2 months later that Tommy's divorce was finalized and that his co-workers at his firm had formally filed for bankruptcy. He lived with our parents, who continued to refer to it as regrouping, their preferred term for Tommy's shortcomings. All 3 of them arrived at my door one Sunday. Through the security camera, I saw them repeatedly ringing the bell while Mom called out, "Nicole, as a family, we need to communicate." I grabbed my phone and texted each of the 3. "Leave now, please. I'll contact the cops if you return." Mom left a casserole on my porch along with a letter about forgiveness and family responsibilities before they finally went. I gave it away to the nearby homeless shelter. I live a tranquil life these days. Grandma's roses are in full bloom, and I care to them. I have a successful career. Last month, I became executive vice president. My grandmother is the reason I feel wonderful. Story 3. At 28, I wasn't really looking for love. I was too preoccupied with becoming a rising star. My cubicle felt more like home than any bar the dating app could ever provide, and spreadsheets from my finance company were my love language. Sarah's rooftop party followed. My best friend and coworker, Sarah, had a knack for pushing me to step outside of my comfort zone. Artists, musicians, and some office-related acquaintances made up the crowd this time. It was then that I saw him. He was having a light-hearted argument with another man about how to repair a brick structure. Tall and slender, with tousled dark brown hair and gentle eyes, he wore a faded band over a weathered leather jacket. T-shirt. The complete antithesis of the buttoned-up crowd I usually associate with, but I was captivated by something about him. "So you believe it's a good idea to paint history a new color?" With a light-hearted smile, he inquired. The other man rolled his eyes. He was a stocky man with a shaved head. "Hey, it keeps the structure intact, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he said, "but it erases the character. The wear and the cracks. The story is told by that." Attracted to their easy banter, I started to creep closer. Sarah suddenly materialized next to me, her eyes gleaming mischievously. "This is Mark, Amelia," she said, urging me on. "I'm Amelia, the spreadsheet whiz I mentioned to you, Mark." As he took me in, Mark's smile got bigger. "A spreadsheet wizard? It sounds amazing." With a flush creeping up my cheeks, I answered, "It pays the bills. But if the topic isn't amortization schedules, I can hold my own in a discussion." Sarah laughed as I gave her a wink. "I accept the challenge," Mark said, his voice warm and inviting. "So, Amelia, the spreadsheet wizard, what do you think about preserving history?" We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was an architect, passionate about breathing new life into old buildings, while I shared stories of my crazy hours at the firm and the thrill of closing a big deal. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before we knew it, we found ourselves standing by the railing overlooking the glittering city skyline. The cold air sent goosebumps prickling down my arms. "This is fun," I admitted, surprised by the slight tremor in my voice. "Yeah," he agreed, his gaze fixed on the city below. "I wouldn't mind doing this again sometime." "Me neither," I blurted out, unable to overthink it. Our first official date was a dinner with Mark's parents, Martha and Arthur, at a fancy restaurant. The conversation flowed easily, at first revolving around wedding plans, the beautiful old library venue I had booked, and the expensive organic caterer I was stressing over. Then things took a strange turn mid-bite of her lobster bisque, pronounced with a peculiar accent. Martha suddenly fixed me with a steely gaze. "So, Amelia," she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Mark tells me you work in finance." "Indeed. I'm a financial analyst at a large firm downtown," I replied, unsure where this was heading. "Analysts sounds important," Arthur chimed in, his booming voice filling the table. Mark, who had been mostly quiet, cleared his throat. Dad, come on. That's not what we're talking about. Just making conversation, son, Arthur said, waving his hand dismissively before turning back to me. So, Amelia, you mentioned a big-name firm. I told him the name, a global player in the financial world. A satisfied smile spread across Martha's face. Excellent, she declared. And you say you do well for yourself. Investments, stocks, that kind of thing. Yes, I manage a portfolio, I replied, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This felt more like an interrogation than a casual dinner with my future in-laws. A portfolio, Martha leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. How much are we talking about here, dear? My jaw dropped. This was outrageous. No one asked questions like that. I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd intervene, but he just fiddled with the breadbasket, avoiding my gaze. That's really personal information, Mrs. Miller, I said, forcing a smile. Oh, come on, honey, Martha huffed. We're practically family now. Isn't that right, Mark? Mark mumbled something non-committal. His cheeks flushed. I decided to take control of the situation. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Money isn't everything. Mark and I love each other, and that's what matters most. Love is great, sweetheart, Arthur chimed in again. But let's face it, love doesn't pay the bills. I took a deep breath. This dinner was turning into a disaster. Maybe we should stick to talking about the wedding, I suggested, desperately trying to redirect the conversation. The following morning, I called my grandma right after I got off the phone with her. As I recounted the awkward dinner with Mark's parents, a wave of doubt washed over me. Her words about greedy and selfish people echoed in my mind, but I dismissed them. Grandma could be a bit old-fashioned at times. Sure, Martha and Arthur were blunt, but they genuinely seemed happy for us. Maybe they just struggled to express their emotions. Fast forward a few months and the wedding planning was in full swing. Every detail from the venue to the flowers felt like pulling teeth whenever money came up. Mark would give a sheepish shrug and say, "Work's been a bit tight lately." His parents, bless their hearts, kept offering suggestions. Cheaper venues outside the city, a family friend who could cater at a discount, which really meant they'd barter for vegetables from their neighbor's garden. In the end, I found myself footing most of the bill. Mark, ever the charmer, would say things like, "You're amazing, honey," handling everything like a champ. But his lack of financial contribution started to grate on me. Finally, the big day arrived. It was beautiful, the weather cooperated, the food was delicious, and most importantly, Mark and I said I do. The only sour note was Grandma. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside, her wrinkled face etched with concern. "Amelia, honey," she said, her voice low. "Be careful with those in-laws of yours. They don't have your best interests at heart." I rolled my eyes. "Here we go again, Grandma. They're just excited. They love Mark. They love me. Everything's fine." The honeymoon phase barely lasted a week before the first major incident occurred. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and Mark and I were still luxuriating in bed when a loud thump from downstairs shattered the peaceful silence. We exchanged confused glances, and Mark mumbled probably the. But that thump was quickly followed by a cacophony of rustling paper and muted exclamations. 3 Nairobis. We ran downstairs, only to see a scene that looked right out of a horror movie. Well, a horror movie loaded with weird wrapping paper and nasty present bags. Martha and Arthur were splayed on the living room floor, surrounded by our wedding presents like vultures pecking over a cadaver. They were looking inside boxes, reigning and rule over certain objects while dismissively tossing others aside. "What in the world is going on here?" and demanded disbelief lacing my voice. Martha made unwrapping, glanced up and flashed a brilliant smile. "Amelia, sweetheart, simply appreciating your gorgeous wedding gifts. Admiring," I sputtered. "It seems more like you're ransacking the house." Arthur held up a crystal vase, peering at it. "Relax, honey, just straightening things out. Can't have all this junk laying about, can we, Flutter?" Incredulous, I cried. These presents were thoughtfully selected by our family and friends. Before I could express my anger, "Maybe they should just leave the presents unopened," Mark said. Although he spoke softly, The message was obvious. I added my voice. R.A. wasn't entirely unaware. Martha laughed. Honey, don't be foolish. Refusing to open gifts is impolite. In addition, she said, her eyes shining, maybe there's something really unique in here, particularly for them. As I watched with increasing annoyance as they went through her wedding presents, I thought sourly. Putting aside whatever piqued their interest, a picture frame made of silver, a sophisticated cheese board with a set of wine glasses with engravings. I had reached a breaking point. Our wedding presents are these, I spoke firmly, not for you to take. Martha's tone was brimming with phony sweetness as she said, Look, honey. We recently came across some items that would look beautiful in our new home. The one redecorating, you know. They were remodeling with our wedding gifts. The rage rose up inside me, ready to boil over. What about the present you gave us? I questioned, my voice strained. Martha halted, her fingers hanging over a box covered in a lovely flowered paper. She rummaged among the pile and eventually brought out a little, irregularly shaped parcel with a flourish. She gave it to me. With every layer of tissue paper I removed, my heart sank as I gently unwrapped it. There was a cheap glass figurine with bright plastic flowers on it, the type you get at a bargain store. I felt sick to my stomach. They thought of this as a wedding present. Grandma could have been correct. It's possible that my marriage was a nightmare. The situation involving the wedding present was only the beginning. Martha. Sprees for shopping became commonplace. Her cheerful phone call asking me to go out with her was really code for me to be her unpaid personal shopper. As we perused stores, Martha would unavoidably come upon an item at the register that she simply had to get. She would grumble about forgetting her wallet and how handy it was to have different bags. As she made this strange shuffle with her things and mine, I would have to pay for both of our items by the time the clerk worked everything out. Not much better was Arthur. His favorite times to visit were on the weekends. He shows in without warning, settles down on the couch, and then spends the whole day watching TV and eating any food I have available. He gave me a straight-faced look and remarked, I wonder why you spend so much time at our place. Doesn't it save money on electricity and groceries? How foolish the man was. Did he believe we were in charge of the charity? Ever the peacemaker, Mark simply rolled his eyes and mumbled that his father needed some company on his birthday. The last straw was dinner. To celebrate being another year older and perhaps wiser, I made the decision to treat myself to a wonderful evening out at a classy restaurant. I invited Martha and Arthur, of course. A huge error. The menu had a confusing mix of unknown substances and French names. Despite this, Martha and Arthur placed their orders for the priciest meals, confidently stating them despite their master's total ignorance. Martha complained that the escargot was too nasty and pushed her dish away halfway through the dinner. Meanwhile, Arthur spat saffron broth all over the table as he choked on a mouthful of boiling bass. The whole night was a catastrophe. My blood pressure had skyrocketed by the time I received the bill. We could have been nourished for a month with the money spent on the lunch. And you know who volunteered to help? Not at all. Not Mark. I coughed out a string while he sat there, unaware. The waiter thanked me and grabbed my payment card. I was furious and upset when I got home and eventually went up to Mark. How can you allow your parents to treat you in such a way? I insisted. Come on, he murmured dismissively. Babe? It's not really important. That's simply the way they are, such as entitled and self-centered. I fired back. This isn't acceptable, Mark. With a groan, he combed through his hair. You must choose your fights even if I adore you. My folks are doing fine. They will remain unchanged. Perhaps he was correct. Maybe I had been gullible and thought I could somehow transform them into the in-laws I had always imagined. However, the truth was right in front of me. There was no changing the fact that Martha and Arthur were who they were. Although it was a turning point, the birthday dinner fiasco wasn't the end. Their approach to gift-giving became painfully obvious. On holidays, give us inexpensive, sentimental things and expect lavish gifts in return. A Christmas-framed photo of a lighthouse. For Mother's Day, consider getting a high-end espresso machine. Any indication at the imbalanced worth of presents, per Martha's thinking, led to a lecture about family and not keeping score. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, would never ask for anything. I would always ask about a Christmas present. "Honey, I have everything I need," she would say dismissively. "Come on over. That's the only important thing." In the meanwhile, Martha and Arthur viewed Mike's gift-giving as a sport. They arrive with a proud gleam in their eyes, displaying their newest treasures: a set of mismatched oven mitts adorned with fading cartoon cats for Valentine's Day, and a cracked porcelain fruit bowl for Christmas. Every sacrifice was like a kick to the face. That year's Thanksgiving was the last insult. I had chosen to spend the evening alone with Mark. We might watch a movie and get some takeout. Naturally, however, Arthur and Martha had different ideas. Their faces painted with smug smiles, they stormed in carrying shopping bags. "Happy Thanksgiving, my love." Martha followed me after noticing a box that was brightly wrapped and wrapping it. I feel sick to my stomach. A garish scarf, similar to those seen at gas station gift shops, was inside. The fabric felt like sandpaper against my skin, and the flowers were plastic and fake. "Well, isn't it ideal?" Martha smiled. "It's a perfect match for your new coat." I made an effort to grin. The coat was a vintage item that was purchased at a secondhand shop. But there was a spectacular clash with the scarf. I muttered, trying to hide my disappointment. "Thanks, Martha." Arthur, meanwhile, was displaying a tiny box. He also announced a small gift for you, son, to help you relax after a demanding workday. When he excitedly opened the box and found a pack of cheap drugstore cigars that smelled like regret and dirty ashtrays, Mark's eyes brightened. With a sincere smile on his face, Mark said, "Thanks, Dad." That was it. The last straw. Here I was, looking at a birthday present that was offensive to my taste, and a husband who seemed more concerned with his wife's welfare, and a pack of drugstore cigars. I felt a simmering anger that threatened to explode. However, I did something wholly unexpected rather than blowing up. I inhaled deeply, made myself smile, and expressed my gratitude for the beautiful presents. With my work performance, there was a ray of hope. I received a sizable bonus that practically begged for celebration, along with the coveted quarterly award. Venice has long been a popular travel destination because of its charming canals and extensive history. Knowingness sealed the deal by speaking Italian fluently. This trip would be an opportunity to get back in touch with Mark and temporarily break free from his parents' controlling influence. However, bad news, in particular, spreads quickly to eager ears. When Martha and Arthur heard of her trip, they swooped down like ravenous vultures. "Venezuela," Martha said, her eyes shining with unsettling greed. "Sounds good. I've always wanted to get a close-up look at those gondolas." Actually, in an attempt to be courteous, I interrupted. "It's just Mark and me on this trip. A brief romantic retreat." Arthur laughed. "Don't be self-centered, Amelia. We've never visited Venice, much less Europe. Consider the images." Images. This had nothing to do with gondola photo ops. It was about getting away from their oppressive presence. I apologize, but my voice was firm. It's a two-person trip. An epic meltdown resulted from my refusal to accept my pop. They accused me of attempting to distance myself from Mark's family and called me avaricious and selfish. The worst thing ever, Mark. For me, the peacekeeper didn't send up. Rather, he muttered that it wouldn't be too bad and that perhaps they could come alone. I realized then that this was more than just a trip. This concerned respect, boundaries, and whether our marriage could withstand his parents' persistent interference. I spoke in an icy tone as I glanced at Mark. "Not at all. They are not invited on this trip, which is ours." The ensuing battle was vicious. Accusations flew like daggers, and harsh words were exchanged. By the end, there was a thick silence between us. We withdrew to opposing sides of the flat. Our formerly contented home days became hazy as a Cold War developed, and the quiet in the apartment served as a continual reminder of the distance that had grown between Mark and me. I didn't give his folks a call. My stomach turned at the thought of their entitled whining. In his self-imposed exile, Mark stayed. All we could say to each other was a hushed good morning in the kitchen. I then woke up one random Saturday morning to find my apartment empty and a sick feeling in my stomach. It irritates me when my phone buzzes during the nightly notifications. Looking at it, my blood, rain, chilly. Confirmations of airline tickets. To Venice, all 3 of them, buy for my account. My throat was scratched by panic. No, it's not possible. But the nauseating reality set in as I read through the confirmations. With the boldness of a seasoned criminal, Mark had booked his own ticket to Venice as well as additional tickets for his beloved parents using my reliable access to our bank account. Additionally, I used my hard-earned money to book hotel reservations. My suspicions were validated. He had used my money to book a trip for himself and his leech-like family behind my back, totally ignoring my feelings. Any affection I still had for him was smolderingly destroyed by the rage. The hotel reservations and return flights were canceled as my fingertips swept over the screen. Then I cut off Mark's access to my bank account with steely determination. Despite their enormous selfishness, it was a tiny gesture of disobedience. After a few hours, my phone rang. I let Mark's name go to voicemail, even though it displayed on the screen. A second later, the notice came. His voice filled with anger and fear. "Where the devil are you, Amelia? The hotel is where we are expected to check in. With the tickets, what did you do?" I didn't listen and erased the message. Then both Martha and Mark sent a flurry of texts containing veiled threats, accusations, and demands. I felt a chill of gloom go through me after reading Mark's last message. "We're done, Amelia. If you don't return the account to me and get us on that fucking plane, think of this as your notice of divorce." Now that I had clarity, I began to plan on my own. My burden decreased with every step I took toward freedom once I got in touch with an attorney. Mark's notice of divorce may have been a present. He waltzed back in with his tail between his legs, but I didn't wait for him. It was cathartic to pack. Knickknacks went into boxes, clothes into luggage. However, the extravagant baubles and mismatched sets that Martha and Arthur gave are not touched. I arranged them on the floor of the living room, an homage to their self-centeredness. One last act of rebellion before I close that chapter of my life. The smell of cinnamon pastries and old furnishings at Redeemer's house was like a cozy embrace. As I described the entire experience, tears came down my cheeks. Anger and anguish are leaking forth like a dam. I patiently listened. She had a melancholy grin. With a trace of, "I told you so," but largely with worry, she murmured quietly, "I told you, honey. You have to learn things the hard way sometimes." "I know," I responded, my voice settling with a renewed resolve. "This may be a good thing. I now know what to avoid and what to look for." A few days later, the afternoon's tranquility was broken by a knock on the door. Before I could respond, Rima pushed me into the rear room and peered through the curtain while my heart lurched. I noticed Mark standing there, looking disoriented and hopeless. "Please, Amelia," he begged. He spoke in a desperate tone. "Let me clarify." With an inscrutable look, Rima cracked open the door. Acknowledging his sins and attempting to put his parents out of his mind, Mark went into a groveling apology. I let out the rage that had been building within of me. With icy rage in my eyes, I stormed into the corridor. "Himself," I sneered. "You were going to take them on vacation with my money, Mark. This isn't about you realizing everything at once. This has to do with your comfort level. At ease since I purchased gifts for your parents and paid the bills," he protested by opening his mouth. He was interrupted by it. "This is over, Mark. Comfort overrides respect, and I don't want to spend my life with someone who allows his parents to dominate him and his spouse. I'm worthy of better." Mark's face crumbled, but I didn't feel sorry for him. With a finality that reverberated in the ensuing quiet, the door closed. Grandma could have been correct. This might not have been the end. It may have been the start of something new. A better one, an existence devoid of entitled in-laws. A life without selfishness or convenience, full of respect and perhaps Sunday love.